For more, we bring in Dan Perry, who is in Middle East editor for the Associated Press. Dan, thank you so much for joining us this morning. You know, we've seen these massive protests already all across Israel. But from the ground, I'm curious, what does their response to these hostage deaths look like up close?
There's a tremendous amount of outrage, but I'm not sure it really moves the needle on the basic equation that's been in place for many months now, which is that the government of Israel refuses to end the war and pull out of Gaza completely, and that is Hamas's condition for returning the hostages, and nothing seems able to break that logjam. There was a moment in late May when President Biden announced the proposal that he presented as an Israeli one that more or less amounted to just that. But since then, Netanyahu has piled on additional demands, and the outrage in Israel it takes two forms. One, of course, is a tremendous amount of hatred for Hamas and jihadism in general, in the sense that they're dealing with absolute barbarians, forcing Israel into a situation which itself is arguably barbaric. The other is against the government, because Israelis are starting to conclude that Netanyahu, for political reasons, wants the war to continue, and those political reasons really should be understood with clarity. Netanyahu can't win the discussion about October 7th. That was just a debacle. He needs that to be forgotten. He needs time to pass. He has created this narrative where, as long as the war goes on, political recriminations have to be put to one side. That clearly incentivizes the war going on forever. Moreover, his government, it's a parliamentary system. The coalition government depends on extremist parties that not only want the war to go on, they want Gaza to be resettled with Jews. Netanyahu doesn't want that, but he also doesn't want them to bring down his government, which they would if he reached a deal. Well, that would trigger elections, and he'd lose the elections.
Right, and what we really wanted to hone in on as well, these protests that we're seeing erupting now, what impact, Dan, do you think they will have on these ceasefire deal negotiations that are happening now? Do they have meaningful sway in those conversations?
Demonstrations always, look impressive, but they kind of rarely move the needle if governments are determined to. Netanyahu, because of a series of mistakes, basically, ends up with 64 out of 120 Knesset seats. And one gets the impression that no matter what he does, no matter what the consequences, they're never going to abandon him, because that would be the end of their political careers as well. What could happen to nonetheless do that? Right now, the polls show that 70% want Netanyahu gone, and that's the people that you see protesting. I suppose if the polls began to show that 90% want him gone, then you'd start to see panic in his coalition. I can see two things happening right now. One is for the military establishment, who have been leaking like mad to every journalist willing to listen, that Netanyahu is preventing a hostage deal, that a hostage deal and a ceasefire deal is attainable, that the arguments presented for why they have to hold on to this or that piece of territory are pretexts. They've been leaking this, and I'm talking about the head of the Mossad and the head of the Shin Bet and the head of the army and the head of the negotiating team. It's just incredible. If they went public with this, that could start to move the needle. The other thing that can happen is for the U.S. government to take a different position. Biden has been protesting the war going on. He's been saying very weakly that the war has to end, but there are actions that he could take to force the issue.
And we have about 10 seconds left, but I'm curious, do you believe fears of a wider war in the Middle East increase after all of this?
Yeah, if no ceasefire deal is reached, there's every possibility that the regional war that we have all been warning about with Lebanon, which would bring in Iran, which could end up drawing in U.S. interests in the Persian Gulf, all of that could absolutely happen. That is the risk, yes.
All right. Dan Perry, always appreciate your perspective. Thank you for joining us.